the time to appease the bully aggressor from the desert, Iran. And that's just the way it is.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Speaker Boehner says that the Hastert rule demands that he only allow votes on bills that are supported by a majority of his own party instead of a majority of the whole House. Last weekend, a constituent asked me where the Hastert rule came from. I did a little research. It doesn't exist. Not a single page of this book, the House Manual of Rules and Procedures, contains the Hastert rule. That's because bills in the House need votes from a majority of all members, not by a majority of any party. The Speaker himself knows the Hastert rule is no rule at all. That's why whenever extremists bring us to the brink of default or cost the government with a deadly shutdown, the Speaker brushes it aside and relies on support from reasonable Republicans and Democrats. The Hastert rule is only used to prevent votes Americans actually want. And they want us to pass reasonable gun laws, to pass ENDA, to protect LGBT Americans from discrimination. They want us to pass common sense immigration reform, and they want us to pass a minimum wage increase. This week, the GOP reminded us that it has no agenda. Don't use the non-existent Hastert rule to block the agenda of the American people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Wisconsin seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today's elections are costing more and more each year. According to the Center for Responsive Politics, winning candidates spent an average of $1.5 million in the 2011-2012 election cycle. More than $4 billion was contributed to campaigns during the last cycle, with 63% of this total coming from donors who gave more than $200. Most would agree that the ideal way to finance political campaigns is through a broad base of donors. This is why I propose to bring back the federal tax credit for small campaign contributions. Today I've introduced the Citizen Involvement in Campaigns Act. Under this legislation, individuals who donate amounts up to $200 to a federal campaign could receive a tax credit equal to that contribution. With more and more campaign operations moving to website and online resources, campaigns could tilt the playing field away from special interest in large donors and empower small donors and average Americans. This bill is a step in the right direction of encouraging greater participation in our campaigns, and I urge my colleagues to co-sponsor this legislation and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, I rise to speak about the negotiations underway in Geneva today between the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council plus Germany. And those negotiations have the potential to lead to a peaceful resolution to the standoff over Iran's nuclear program. If successful, these negotiations could put in place the restrictions and intrusive inspections needed to ensure that Iran's nuclear program is used exclusively for peaceful purposes. With a significant diplomatic breakthrough within reach, now is not the time to consider new sanctions, which could derail the negotiations and strengthen the position of those in Iran who oppose a settlement with the United States.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to remind all Americans that we should pay our debts. and I stand here today to pay a debt for a friendly wager I made with my colleague Joe Kennedy, and I rise to offer my congratulations to the Boston Red Sox for winning the World Series. The Red Sox overcame a 2-1 series lead and rattled off 3 straight victories to capture the 2013 championship. I certainly think that the Red Sox showed the St. Louis Cardinals and the rest of the world why they are deserving of the slogan Boston Strong. However, I hope that this series win will forever erase the curse of the Bambino. Yes, Red Sox fans, no more excuses for losing. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow will mark 50 years since President John F. Kennedy's tragic assassination in Dallas, Texas. As Americans pause to remember President Kennedy's legacy of public service and fights toward achieving racial equality, North Texas will host events related to the occasion, both in Dallas and Fort Worth. A dear friend and mentor, former House Speaker Jim Wright, who accompanied the President on that fateful day, will be a special guest at the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce high-impact 50th anniversary breakfast at the downtown Fort Worth Hilton. Formerly known as the Hotel Texas, it's where President Kennedy spent his last night and delivered one of his final 2 speeches. President Kennedy defied a tumultuous era of racial and gender discrimination by promoting forward-thinking policies for the sake of progress. Kennedy also defined the civil rights crisis as moral as well as constitutional and legal. As we commemorate President Kennedy's life and the historic impact he had on the Dallas-Fort Worth area and the nation, I call upon my colleagues to work together to ensure that the legacy that inspired a generation lives on. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Nebraska seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to acknowledge National Rural Health Day. The 3rd District of Nebraska spans 75 counties and contains hundreds of small towns and over 50 critical access hospitals. The providers who serve these communities face many challenges without the heavy hand of government. In particular, I'm concerned about physician supervision regulations which may be released by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services later this month. Physicians, nurses, and ancillary staff in rural facilities are highly trained and experienced in determining the appropriate level of patient care. Failure to allow practitioners the necessary discretion to manage care administration may actually limit the access to basic services and could further discourage physicians from seeking rural positions. I will continue to fight to ensure our rural communities maintain access to the quality care, and I appreciate the opportunity to recognize National Rural Health Care Day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Texas seek recognition? Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are remaining issues of justice that this House must address. First, let me offer my deepest sympathy to the people of the Philippines who, as you look at the landscape, 10 million people have been affected, 4,011 deaths, 4.4 million people displaced. We must come together as a nation, come together as a Congress, and provide the resources. Let me salute the United States military and our Marines who landed first, who are a lifeline to those people. Let me say to them that we are with you. And then I want to say that the Senate has addressed the justice issue, ENDA, for the LGBT community. How can we stand here on the precipice of honoring great leaders and not recognize that there are people who need human dignity past ENDA now? And let me pay tribute to the 50th year of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy and salute him, yes, salute him, as one of the greatest leaders and visionaries, Camelot, who led this country and inspired this country to greatness and service. We owe a debt of gratitude and appreciation to the legacy of his family and to the service they've given to President John F. Kennedy. May he rest in peace, and thank him for inspiring millions of people. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
I ask unanimous consent to extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, the American people are losing trust in their government. The continuous dragnet collection of data by the NSA is just one of the many reasons why. Liberty and privacy are the foundations for which this country was established. Even though emails have replaced most handwritten letters and phone calls have replaced many face-to-face conversations, these principles still endure today. The administration defends PRISM and similar programs by relying on warrants whose mere existence mocks the Constitution. The FISA court's proceedings where these warrants originate take place behind closed doors and cater only to government's cases for increased surveillance. In these secret, one-sided proceedings, no one is there to advocate on behalf of privacy and individual liberty. No one is there to advocate on behalf of the American people. With no requirements for public disclosure of the court's decision, Congress and the American people are left in the dark. This is unacceptable. Maintaining a secure nation can be done with the bounds of the Constitution. Privacy and national security are not mutually exclusive. That is why I'm a co-sponsor of the Liberty E-Act and the USA Freedom Act and the NSA Inspector General Act to help address many of these issues. I urge my colleagues in the House and Senate, both Republicans and Democrats, to stand up for liberty. I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Ask for unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, revise, extend, etc.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today because tomorrow is the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy. President Kennedy inspired me to get into government. I was only 14 years old when he passed, and his death has an indelible mark on me and everybody of my generation who experienced that national sharing of grief that went on that weekend. President Kennedy was a person who said that politics is an honorable profession, and I believe it is, and I believe people should get involved in politics and public service. He founded the Peace Corps and asked people to ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, which was a call to service. It was a great loss to our nation. He gave a great deal to our country. I'd ask everybody to watch the TV specials, to read as much as they can, and to learn what they can about an honorable gentleman who tried to inspire people to get in government and do the right thing. I thank his family for his coming along because it inspired me. I got to see him in Memphis when he campaigned, and he's my hero. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
To address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow, November 22nd, we mark the 50th anniversary of one of the saddest days in American history. This anniversary affords us the opportunity to remember President John F. Kennedy, who also served in this House, and to reflect on his idealism and spirit of public service that he inspired in the American people. President Kennedy encouraged all Americans to dream big dreams, like putting a man on the moon by the end of that decade. He reminded us that this country is capable of great feats when the American people come together with a defined mission. As President Kennedy said in 1961, it will not be one man going to the moon, it will be an entire nation, for all of us must work to put him there. President Kennedy's goal was achieved on July 20, 1969, when Apollo 11 Commander Neil Armstrong was the first person to step on the moon. It is good to remember how President Kennedy inspired a nation. The torch of freedom President Kennedy described in his inaugural speech has now been passed to yet another generation. Let this generation celebrate President Kennedy's sense of idealism and public service every day. I thank the Speaker, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Hawaii seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the people of my home state of Hawaii, I stand today to send our heartfelt condolences to the victims of Super Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. Like so many people in Hawaii and around the world, I and my family have loved ones, friends, and others who were affected by this devastation in Tacloban City and in other areas of the Philippines, and they have been at the forefront of our thoughts and prayers. In the wake of such a horrible tragedy, The positive that we can find is the outpouring of compassion, support, and most importantly, aloha from my state towards the people in the Philippines. The Hawaii Air National Guard is working with the U.S. Pacific Command as we speak, which is based in Hawaii, as collectively they provide unparalleled air, maritime, and ground support to the aid efforts of the Philippines authorities. All across Hawaii, as across the world, we're seeing businesses, nonprofits, and individuals standing up individually and taking the time and energy to raise resources and to provide support to these aid efforts, to these relief efforts, and helping to reunite families and friends and communities. I continue to pray for all those who have lost homes, family, and friends, and encourage all who are able to contribute in any way possible in this recovery effort. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Ask unanimous consent to rest House 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As we reflect on the 50 years since the passing of President Kennedy, I want to reissue that thought about call for service. He struck me as, in his inaugural address, of asking not what this country can do for you, but what you can do for the country. And I immediately responded when he created the Peace Corps. I'm wearing this button today proudly as a returned Peace Corps volunteer. And my thoughts are, as we sort of enter into the next half century of thought about America and service, President Kennedy not only urged us to go to space, he urged us to send our people to places where no person had ever gone before, no American had ever been, to all of these remote countries in poverty situations, in places where nobody had ever lived. It changed the image of America around the world so positively. So for you young people that are thinking about the future, don't think of America as just the platform to make money. America is the platform to launch peace and understanding around the world. Join the Peace Corps. Serve this country. Call for the service. It's honorable. Thank you.
The chair will recognize members for special order speeches without prejudice to the possible resumption of legislative business. The chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leave of absence is requested from Mr. Lowenthal of California for today, Mr. Radel of Florida from November 18, 2013 through December 31st, 2013, Mr. Rush of Illinois for November 18 through 21, 2013.
Without objection, the requests are granted. We're ready. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomert, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, it's my honor to recognize a good friend whom I have tremendous respect from the state of Florida, my friend Ron DeSantis, for such time as he may consume.
Well, I thank the gentleman from Texas. Mr. Speaker, I am struck by having been here to witness something that I think is pretty neat. We had a newly sworn-in member take the oath of office to become a member of this body, and part of it is neat because he got endorsed by Duck Dynasty, which I know a lot of people like, but it was neat because I think it reminds us what our duties are here. He was asked to take an oath of office right here in the well of the House. And that oath was very simple. It charged him with the duty to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I think we need more of a reminder that that's our duty here. I'm struck by reading the Constitution, how the Founding Fathers laid out separation of powers, checks and balances. For example, Article 1 states clearly, all legislative power is vested in the Congress of the United States. Article 2 prescribes authority for the President and imposes a duty on him to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. And I think that going back on those constitutional foundations and looking at how this particular president has made claims of his authority to essentially put aside the law or change the law should cause us great concern. I mean, for example, with this employer mandate aspect of Obamacare, the statute said very clearly it shall take effect this January 2014. Well, that obviously would have been disastrous had they implemented that, and we in the House were willing to delay it by statute. The President chose to do it by executive fiat. And then most recently, with the idea that the Obamacare was causing people to lose their plans, a lot of people in this body said, look, we ought to grandfather all these plans in, let people keep their plans. The President threatened to veto that, and then he issues essentially an executive order saying that he's not going to enforce, or he's going to extend the grandfather clause and not enforce the Obamacare mandates that are causing the cancellation. So on the one hand, Obamacare is a holy writ that people in Congress are not allowed to touch in any way with our Article I power, but the President can essentially pick and choose which parts to enforce, which parts to delay, who to grant waivers to. That ultimately is not sustainable, and it conflicts with the basic structure of American government. The American Revolution, if you read the Declaration of Independence, it was a revolt against executive power and the British king. You look, Jefferson lists all the abuses that they were revolting against. One of the things that he mentioned was that King George III, that George III had done wrong was for abolishing our most valuable laws and altering fundamentally the form of government. And students in school throughout America are taught Congress passes the law. The President, of course, can sign and veto the law. The President has a duty to enforce the law. Now, there is certainly prosecutorial discretion that comes with that. And President, if they have a good faith belief that a law is unconstitutional, of course they got to prefer the Constitution to the statutes. But here, this President has not made any claim that Obamacare is unconstitutional. Indeed, he can't, because it's his signature piece of legislation. But I think the key thing to just think about is the Founding Fathers, they did not create separation of powers, checks and balances, because they thought that students would need something to study in civics class. They did it because ultimately that structure of government was the surest way to protect the individual liberty of the American people and to preserve and maintain the rule of law. And I think disputes that we have regarding what this particular president may do, it should not even be about him per se, because that just gets lost in partisanship back and forth. I think when we see any president taking steps that may not comport with how the structure of the government was intended to operate, we got to think about what precedent that sets, not just tomorrow, but 50 years from now. And so I've introduced a resolution that enumerates some of the instances in which the President has gone beyond using executive discretion and is essentially rewriting the law, either by failing to enforce entirely or suspending affirmatively different provisions of the law. Much has been said recently about the failure of this core promise with respect to Obamacare, that if you like your plan, you can keep it. Obviously, we're seeing that that's not true. We're going to continue to see that. People are going to lose doctors, and it really is a deception on a massive scale. So I was thinking, if you like your plan, you keep your plan. That obviously didn't work. Maybe we should just get everyone in Congress and the White House to agree with this simple proposition. If you take an oath to the Constitution, you should keep your oath to the Constitution. So I thank the gentleman from Texas. I know you'll be someone who will take that oath seriously, and I yield back to my friend from Texas.
Thank the gentleman from Florida. What a profoundly novel idea. If you take the oath, you should keep it. And that doesn't even mean if you like it, it's just if you take the oath, you should keep it. And as my friend Mr. DeSantis was pointing out, there are so many problems with the Obamacare bill, and I know the President referred to the bill as Obamacare many times and said he was proud to do so. So I certainly don't mean any disrespect or anything like that. On the other hand, it's extremely difficult to call it the Affordable Care Act when you know it's not affordable. And a great indication of just how affordable it is came from a lady named Jessica Sanford. I heard the president at a press conference read the letter from Jessica Sanford from Washington State. And when I heard it, I thought, well, good, at least somebody's been able to find something good from Obamacare, because in my office we've heard from so many people that have already been adversely affected. So I thought, well, great. You know, 300 million plus people in the United States. He found one person that had a letter he could read from Jessica Sanford. Then it turns out this article from the Daily Caller on November 19th. Jessica Sanford received a major shout-out last month when President Barack Obama mentioned her fan letter lauding her cheap new Obamacare coverage. But the Washington State business owner has now been informed that she can't even afford the cheapest Obamacare exchange plan in her state. Quote, "I'm really terribly embarrassed," unquote, Sanford told the Washington State Wire. Quote, "It has completely turned around on me. I mean completely," unquote. The Washington State Exchange website, Washington Health Plan Finder, originally gave Sanford a quote for coverage that would insure both her and her son for just $169 per month. But after a series of corrections, that's one of the few people that was able to get through on the website, gets a quote. Turns out that's entirely wrong. Makes you wonder how many people got the wrong quote and won't find out, won't realize they did, and they'll end up January 1st without insurance, thinking they've signed up, thinking they bought a policy they could afford, only to find out they couldn't afford it. In this case, it says the Obamacare Exchange website originally calculated Sanford would be eligible for a federal Obamacare tax credit that would lower monthly premium total by $452 per month, prompting the effusive letter that Obama read aloud during a White House speech. Quote, "I am a single mom, no child support, self-employed, and I haven't had health insurance for 15 years because it's too expensive. I was crying the other day when I signed up. So much stress lifted." So the president was quick to share Ms. Sanford's gratitude and saying that Sanford's experience is, quote, "what the Affordable Care Act is all about," unquote. He went on, quote, "The essence of the law, the health insurance that's available to people, is working just fine." The president went on to say, "In some cases, actually, it's exceeding expectations. The prices are lower than we expected. The choice is greater than we expected." But this article points out that Sanford was one of 8,000 people to be affected by 4,600 policies sold on the Washington Exchange that had been quoted premium rates that were too low. Ms. Sanford said, "I was dumbfounded. I thought this was a total mistake. They're going to correct this. This isn't true." Now she says she can't even afford the cheapest bronze Obamacare plan. Quote, "I was like, forget that," unquote. "I'm not going to pay." So she's going uninsured. Sanford now says of Obamacare, quote, "You are stuck on this big treadmill of bureaucracy, and you know, it feels very out of control." This article from today, this afternoon actually, from Stephen Ertelt, entitled "Obamacare Denies Hospital Choice for Blind Child with Rare Bone Disease." It says, as the Washington Post reports, a number of the nation's top hospitals, including the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles, and children's hospitals in Seattle, Houston, St. Louis, are cut out of most plans sold on the exchange. In most cases, the decision was about the cost of care. Here's how Obamacare is hurting one family. In Seattle, the region's predominant insurer, Premier Blue Cross, decided not to include the Children's Hospital as an in-network provider, except in cases where the service sought cannot be obtained anywhere else. Children's non-unique services were too expensive given the goal of providing affordable coverage for consumers, spokesman Eric Erling said in an email. And which brings up the point, you know, the president wanted to provide everybody health insurance, and some of us, like me, were more concerned with getting them quality health care that was affordable. All this talk about insurance, the bigger, more important question should have been, can we get them health care they can afford? And one of the biggest promises was, it'll lower most everybody's cost. And it turns out that was not true at all either. There's some in states, in a state like New York, where it was overpriced previously, where it's come down some, but overall, when you add 18,000 new IRS agents that will not even ever apply a Band-Aid, they may cause a bunch of ulcers, but they'll never provide any health care. They're not from the U.S. government to help you. They're there to go through all of your most important and most personal decisions with you, the IRS. Go figure. This institution, the IRS, this agency that we find out got weaponized by the Obama administration to go after people they disagreed with. Richard Nixon had an enemies list, but he never could do much with it. This administration has an enemies list, and they have really gone after people and made them suffer for having a different political opinion than this administration. This article points out, for example, a pediatric appendectomy at Children's costs about $23,000. At another community hospital, it costs closer to $14,000. Meltzer said his hospital often bills more than community hospitals for comparable procedures because the children it treats are often gravely ill, so even a routine tonsillectomy may be more complicated. But as a result, families like Jeffrey Blanks, which has relied on Seattle Children's Hospital since his daughter Zoe received a diagnosis of a rare bone disorder, face difficult decisions. Under some of the new laws health plans, the family would no longer be able to take Zoe to Children's Hospital for her routine checkups, or it could count as an out-of-network visit, saddling the family with huge bills. As the pro-life movement warned during its adoption in Congress, health care will be rationed and health care access will be limited when the government gets involved. These lessons have been seen for decades in nations like Canada and England, and the United States is now following suit. And it makes such a great point because when you add 18,000 IRS agents to be even more intrusive and get into your most private decisions about health care and your own health, they not only may cause you ulcers or create problems, they don't help at all, and yet I have no idea what the average IRS salary will be. I would imagine the IRS average salary will be a lot higher than $56,000. But if you just take $56,000 as the average for the 18,000 IRS agents, it means that $1 billion next year will go for IRS agents to harass you that will come out of money that should be going to health care, and it's not going to help you a bit. In fact, they're playing for the other team. They're out after you, not out to help you. And then when you add in all of these millions of navigators, and you add in all the tens of thousands, maybe some will make over 100,000, well, I'm sure some of them will, that are involved in this navigator process, not the lowest level, but some surely will. And you think about all the billions of dollars over the next years that will be spent for navigators that, as we heard here in testimony from Kathleen Sebelius herself, yeah, they can be convicted of a felony, and we won't catch it because we're not checking on that kind of thing. Well, as a former judge who sentenced people to prison, for example, I never sent a woman to prison for felony welfare fraud when her crime was getting a job to try to get out of the hole the government lured her into by promising checks for every child she could have out of wedlock. I do believe in holding people accountable. I would sentence them, give them probation, and then do things like either max them out or come close to maxing out 800 hours of community service, but then make very clear as an incentive, but if you get your GED or high school diploma, then I'll knock out, say, 750 hours to urge them to go forward, help themselves, which ultimately helps society. That's the kind of thing government's supposed to do. But instead, this government, for too long, going back to the Great Society days, has incentivized things that lured people away from their God-given potential. It hadn't helped them. It's lured them away from their potential. And here we are now with Obamacare. It isn't just luring people away from their health care. It's put a wall up between them and their health care. You know, and I knew when I would hear people, our friends across the aisle here in the House and in the Senate, talk about health insurance is a right. Well, it's not in the Constitution as a right, but I was more concerned about health care than health insurance. And there are ways to make it affordable. When we see these kind of disparities, $23,000, $14,000 for the same tonsillectomy, it should be very clear that we need competition. And when you have government running everything, there is no competition. The government screws that up royally. It prevents the thing that made America so great, entrepreneurialism, competitive advantages that people have that work hard. It destroys those kind of incentives, and now we're seeing it destroy lives. Here is article from November 19th. HHS Secretary Sebelius visits South Florida to meet with healthcare navigators. Gee, wouldn't it be nice if we weren't paying billions of dollars for government workers that'll make your health care decisions more miserable instead of giving you more freedom? Here's an article from yesterday, FoxNews.com. Second wave of health plan cancellations looms. It says a new and independent analysis of Obamacare warns of a ticking time bomb, predicting a second wave of 50 million to 100 million insurance policy cancellations next fall, right before the midterm elections. The next round of cancellations and premium hikes is expected to hit employees, particularly of small businesses. And it goes on to talk about, as reported by AEI's Scott Gottlieb, some businesses got around requirement by renewing their policies before the end of 2013, but the relief is temporary, and they're expected to have to offer in compliance plans for 2015. According to Gottlieb, that means beginning in October of 2014, the cancellation notices will start to go out. So the millions of cancellations that have gone out now, they say 5 million, and people make the mistake of saying 5 million people. That's 5 million policies. That's the information that I've got. 5 million policies, approximately, so far. That's a lot more than 5 million people. That could be 15, 20 million people. And then this article is exactly right. AEI is exactly right that come next year, a lot of people, and we've heard this, Mr. Speaker, a lot of people have been renewing their policies now before the end of the year so that they don't completely lose it until next year around this time. So next fall, there will be millions and millions and millions more who will get those notice of cancellations. As a result, this article points out from Marguerite Bowling that Obama's legacy will be more Americans than ever reject government role in health care, and that it points out the way it's gone from 64% or even up to 69% wanting government to be responsible for their health care to now dropping to 42% of Americans, because people have begun to see what so many of us have been talking about for a number of years. The best solution is not more government. The best solution is not having navigators and IRS agents taking away money that could be spent on health care. Well, this article from David Martosco points out that Obama, our president, had claimed that more than 100 million Americans have enrolled. Obviously, that was just a mistake in the teleprompter. It's not his fault. But an article from the Heritage Foundation Morning Bell: the American people rose up to repeal a health care law once before. They can do it again. And it goes back and points out about the bill that had been passed under a man that I greatly revere, is a great president, Ronald Reagan, and he thought he was providing America, you know, a great gift of catastrophic care for seniors, but it didn't take but a couple of years for people to see this is a disaster, this isn't a good thing. So in 1989 they stepped up and got it repealed. Interesting CBS poll, though, yesterday points out that 84% of Democrats want Obamacare changed or repealed. And I had not seen that before that article. So it is important to understand just what's at stake with Obamacare. And these things are kind of worn. I've been through them so much, and I had gone through and read the bill so I'd know what was in it before I voted, and which was why I voted against it. But there are things in here, and I'll just hit a few, since people are now waking up as this thing has become a reality. People are starting to wake up and realize, wait a minute, this was not such a good idea. So when there were some that were concerned here in this room about the president representing that abortions would not be paid for under Obamacare, some of us had read the bill. I think at that point it was the 1,000-page bill, then the one that came out of committee, and then somehow it magically became around 2,000 pages, and then we end up with one, my copy, 2,400 pages, or just under 2,500. But like at page 119, this was a comfort to some people when they read the services described in this clause are abortions for which the expenditure of federal funds appropriated for the Department of Health and Human Services is not permitted based on the laws in effect of the date that is 6 months before the beginning of the plan year involved. But then it does have a provision that abortions which public funding is allowed. And so when people, and then the next section, prohibition on federal funds for abortion services and community health insurance options. And then that's the last I could find of abortion specifically being mentioned. But what gets really clever, since we now are of the information age, where you can go online and see bills, and you can do an electronic word search. If you go online and look do an electronic word search for the word abortion. I didn't see it, but what you have to be aware of is these are really clever people. They were clever enough as they wrote this to make sure that the Speaker's office and certain staffs would be exempted. And it was really intriguing how clever some of these things were. But to avoid a word search picking this stuff up, like over here at page 122, it says, assured availability of varied coverage through exchanges. And it says the Secretary, talking about Secretary Sebelius right now, shall assure that with respect to qualified health plans offered in any exchange established pursuant to this title, there's one such plan that provides coverage, at least one, of services described in clauses little I and little 2I of subparagraph capital B. Well, that surely couldn't be abortion unless you flip back and see what little I and little 2I of B is, a capital B, and guess what? That's the abortion reference over in page 119. And that's the way you get around people picking up those things, that of course she's going to have provisions in here about that. And of course people shouldn't forget that the provision at page 429, it was a special adjustment to FMAP determination for certain states recovering from a major disaster. This was put in there to buy the votes of people from Louisiana. That's why some called it the Louisiana Purchase. So we got special consideration in there for that. Now, there's all kinds of things I used to go through. Of course, AARP got special dispensation. And also, this administration saw that Medicare Advantage was really helping some people out. Their costs were lower. There were a lot of people that were telling me they like Medicare Advantage. And so, as Obamacare would do, it would try to destroy anything that people liked and was helpful, and mandate that you couldn't have those provisions in your policy, so that they knew all along by putting this kind of thing in this bill, like at 904, that people that liked their Medicare Advantage were not going to get to keep it. They sure weren't going to like it after this bill got through with them, because at 904, it goes after Medicare Advantage and says nothing in this section shall be construed as requiring the Secretary to accept any or every bid submitted by an MA, Medicare Advantage organization, under this subsection. And then the next capital C subparagraph 2I, authority to deny bids that propose significant increase in cost or sharing or decrease in benefits, because as the government keeps mandating more and more things like maternity care for men that are single and maybe beyond their childbearing years. Well, a single man that's 70 years old may think, gee, I'm beyond childbearing years. I probably won't get pregnant anytime soon. Maybe I don't need maternity care. Well, maybe Secretary Sebelius thinks you do. So you're going to pay for it anyway. And that's the way people end up paying more than what they really need. And this is in the second volume, but and I never could understand it. I keep asking questions and nobody will give an explanation as why at page 1312 in a health care bill, to make sure everybody got the health care they needed, that we had to create the Commission Corps and Ready Reserve Corps for service in time of national emergency. Over page 1314, it talks about national emergencies and public health crisis. Gets health in there for part of it, but not under national emergencies. It gets above that, talking about the purpose, meet both routine public health and that's conjunctive, not disjunctive, and emergency response missions. Well, I wish they'd put health in here and we'd be more assured that this isn't creating some kind of presidential brown shirts or something, but we can't get an answer who these people are, what they're being trained with, what they're being trained on. Are they being trained with weapons? Are they being trained with medical equipment? What are they being trained on? But one thing that I've learned as both a judge and a Chief Justice and now in Congress is that if words are not specific, somebody's going to figure out to just use their plain meaning. And so when something says national emergencies like this bill, there will be times it'll be called in for national emergencies rather than just health emergencies. And the next section talks about public health emergencies, both foreign and domestic, but we've already learned that they didn't put the word health in the national emergency. And so it's strange, because these are commissioned officers of the Ready Reserve Corps. They'll be appointed by the President. Commissioned officers of the regular Corps shall be appointed by the President, and it is subject to advice and consent of the Senate, but that's for the actual appointment. But it makes clear over here that their subject says that the Corps will be available and ready for involuntary calls to active duty during national emergencies and public health crises, and then below the health crisis, foreign and domestic. So that's some more. And I have insurance that has a health savings account attached to it. I think Aetna could have done better, and I was looking forward to improving my policy, except that Obamacare came in and made sure that anybody that had a policy with a high deductible and health savings account they liked were probably not going to be able to keep it, because they took shots and terrifically restricted what you could use a health savings account for. The goal is to get rid of them, because if people get that much control over their own health savings account, or as the bill I filed back before Obamacare ever passed, nearly a year before it passed, I'd say give seniors a choice. Let them choose Medicare, let people choose Medicaid, or it'd be cheaper for us if we just say, look, we will buy you a Cadillac, not a Bronze. We will buy you the best coverage, great coverage, and it'll have a high deductible. Now pay maybe $5,000, something like that, for a deductible, and we'll give you the cash in a health savings account. You get control back of your health care. You can handle it yourself. Your debit card will be coded where you can only use it for health care, but then let you make the decisions. But this won't even let you go get your own medicine or drug unless it's prescribed. This kind of stuff is running up the cost and trying to get rid of HSAs. It's very clear. They're just, oh, and I love they got a provision in here for states. This back 2,300 or so, they got provision in here that, gee, we're giving out grants, but if your state has bothered to do malpractice reform like the federal government hadn't done, then, you know, if you put caps on pain and suffering, for example, then you're not going to be getting the grants that other states are. Well, there are a lot of problems with Obamacare, and I hope that by the end, before the election next year, people will realize that what some of us have been saying for years is true. It's in America's best interest to have health care reform, but that's not it. It is not it. There's another issue. There are two other things I want to address very quickly. Mr. Speaker, how much time do I have left? 25 minutes. Yeah. Is that correct? One is about Guantanamo Bay. Yeah, I had the television on when I was working at my desk in the wee hours of the morning this morning. I can't remember, maybe 1, 2, 3 a.m., something like that. But show where some psychologist had been basically corrupted by being used at Guantanamo Bay for psychological warfare. Totally false story. I mean, there's still a lot of people walking around that don't know that no one has ever been waterboarded at Guantanamo Bay. Having been there 2 or 3 times, you know, you get the picture. And Amnesty International comes regularly. These groups come regularly. And when you find out what's really going on there, it's really the guards that are put through all kinds of Hades. They have excrement and urine thrown on them, and they're not allowed to even get angry back. Last time I was there, they said there had been one soldier who had responded angrily, and he was punished for it. Their instructions are when you have urine or feces thrown on you by one of the detainees at Guantanamo Bay, you just don't react, and then you get the day off so you can go clean up, change clothes. So the inmates are constantly coming up with innovative ways to get feces and urine on our guards. That was last time. Hopefully they've dealt with it better. The punishment, when I was there before, they were would take away some of the movie watching time that the detainees got to have. So, and if it was really egregious enough, they might cut into their outdoor time a little bit. But I was told that Amnesty International gets real upset about that, so they don't like to cut out their outdoor time, so they're more restrictive on the movie watching time that our detainees at Guantanamo may get. And this, you know, what a juxtaposition. What an amazing thing. The New York Times used to bill itself, and it is arguable that it really was accurate, as the newspaper of record, but they have so corrupted their standards that they could say about an overt lie, someone misspoke. This is not a newspaper of record. It's really just a sad day for America regarding the New York Times. But every now and then they get a story right. But unfortunately, now we have to sometimes go to England or other countries whose media is not overwhelmed with bias for or against a particular administration, so we can get proper reporting. But this story is from Russia Today. I mean, I was in the Soviet Union in 1973. I could read a little bit of Russian, speak a little Russian back then. Hadn't had any reason to for over 30 years, so I don't remember much anything but how to get to the bathroom. But from Russia Today, they report, and this was the first I saw, and then started looking for more information. The U.S. Senate is seemingly deadlocked when dealing with the Guantanamo Bay detention facility, voting down dueling measures which would have either loosened or tightened restrictions on transferring detainees. And then we found one, 2014 NDAA, now in Senate, could finally mean the end of Guantanamo. More than half of Guantanamo Bay's 164 detainees have been cleared for transfer to other nations, MSNBC reports, but have remained at the prison due to congressional measures complicating the transfer protocol. Yeah, some of us are concerned that since we keep transferring people out, releasing them, and they keep killing Americans, so many of them, after they're released, I'd say one is too many, but one's not near as many as have been reported going back and continuing to kill Americans. This talks about even a good Republican who's reportedly aiding the Guantanamo Bay win for President Obama. But White House top Senate Democrats successfully defended provisions in the National Defense Authorization Act that would loosen restrictions on transferring detainees out of Guantanamo Bay. advancing President Obama's goal of closing the facility by a margin of 55 to 43. Yeah, they can vote like that because they've got enough people that aren't up for re-election next year, so they can take a vote like that. So that caused me to go look at the law being discussed and voted on and find this provision in there. Section 1032, the authority to temporarily transfer individuals detained at United States Naval Station, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to the United States for emergency or critical medical treatment. So, okay, they say, yeah, see, we gotta get them out of there sometimes for medical treatment. They got incredibly good medical treatment at Guantanamo Bay. This says, status while in the United States, an individual who is temporarily transferred under authority in subsection a while in the United States shall be considered to be paroled into the United States temporarily pursuant to a provision of the Immigration Nationality Act. But then it goes on under Section 1033 to say that transfer for detention and trial, the Secretary of Defense may transfer a detainee described in subsection A to the United States for detention and trial if the Secretary determines that the transfer is in the national security interest of the United States. And it does provide that Congress should be notified not later than 30 days before the date of proposed transfer. But if the President, with a wave of his hand, can waive off mandatory language in a bill that was passed without a single Republican vote, if they can waive off provisions of the immigration bill and just flat out change the law unilaterally as the chief executive, then it sure wouldn't be very hard to say, oh, whoops, we didn't give Congress notice. Those people are in the United States, because once they were in the United States, things take a big turn. I remember my friend from across the aisle, Anthony Weiner, was so upset. He actually said he wanted these detainees brought to New York City and put on trial and executed there in New York City. Well, having been a prosecutor, judge, and chief justice, I knew he would be Exhibit A for why, if they brought the detainees to New York City, they shouldn't get a trial there. They'd have to transfer them somewhere else, because you had people like Anthony Weiner who were not particularly capital punishment supporters but wanted them to be executed. So that would have been Exhibit A and why you couldn't get a fair trial if they were brought to New York. And some of our friends get very confused and demand, we want these people at Guantanamo Bay to have the same rights under the Constitution that everybody else does. Well, everybody doesn't have the same rights under the Constitution. When I was in the Army for 4 years, I didn't have the rights everybody else did. I wasn't free to assemble where I wanted. I wasn't free to say what I wanted to about the President. I wasn't happy with Jimmy Carter. We saw Fort Benning going down and down and down. We saw our nation attacked by an act of war in Tehran, and there was no response. That's still being used today to recruit people to Al-Qaeda, to terrorism, because of how weak our response was then, how weak the response was when we were attacked in '83 at Beirut, and certainly the ongoing weak responses after the World Trade Center bombing in '93, the USS Cole, the embassy attacks. And I know there are people that would say to such embassy attacks in the '90s, well, what difference does it make at this point? Well, perhaps if it had made a difference to the Clinton administration, we would have been better prepared and people wouldn't have died in Benghazi. But this is a disaster. Under the Constitution, nobody is promised a trial in a U.S. District Court, and people need to understand that, because in the Constitution there is no U.S. District Court. As my old constitutional law professor at Baylor used to say, there's only one court created in the Constitution. Every other court in America, federal court that is, owes its existence and continued existence and jurisdiction to the United States Congress. That's it. So if you're an immigrant, Our Constitution says you get due process at an immigration court. If you're in the military, the Constitution assures you will get due process in a military court. And I can tell you, that's kind of tough when a soldier stands in front of a military jury, all wearing uniform, all appointed by the commanding officer to whom they account after that trial is over. It's a little different than a jury that you would get just picked at random from your peers. They're not picked at random. The commanding officers from platoon on up through company and all the way up to the installation, they send recommendations, and they eventually funnel their way up to the commanding general for a general court-martial, and then they're handpicked by the general. These are the people to be on the jury. Well, that is constitutional. It's been upheld many times. So I have a little trouble, having served in the military, understanding why someone who wants to destroy our country and kill all the Americans they can, why are they entitled to more rights under the Constitution than somebody that's giving their lives in our U.S. military? They're not. They're not given more rights than our U.S. military. And in fact, under international law, the way it's existed, going back as far as it's been recorded, when someone was part of a country or group that declared war on another country or group and they were captured, they were held until their group or country said they were no longer at war. Then we let go the ones that promised not to be at war after the war was over and punished those who were guilty of war crimes. And I also, Mr. Speaker, want to make sure people understand what we have at Guantanamo. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was the leader, people call him the mastermind, of 9/11, 2001. Very unrepentant. Not only is he unrepentant, he, in 2008, in December, agreed to plead guilty and went through, I believe, at least 2 hearings where, through in-depth questioning by the judge, he admitted his role in killing Americans. We know he filed this pleading, of which I have a copy here, that was released by military judge Colonel Henley, declassified, so we could see what Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the 9/11 mastermind, as he has said himself, or he talked about his planning it, and he had some resources where he could translate his language into English so that he could write this whole thing. There's some idioms perhaps that may be misused, but anyway, he's a brilliant man. He just hates Americans and loves to kill them. But in his pleading, he says, in God's book, he ordered us to fight you everywhere we find you, even if you were inside the holiest of all cities, the mosque in Mecca and the holy city of Mecca, even during sacred months. In other words, it would be perfectly fine for him or one of his buddies to kill Americans in a mosque in Mecca, but heaven help the person that causes any damage at all to the same mosque. He said in God's book, and this is as if he has legal training, he does this quite well. He states a premise and he follows it up with a provision from the law of the Quran. I mean, the Quran is a book basically of law. In God's book, verse 9, Al-Taba, then fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them, seize them, besiege them, lie in wait for them in each and every ambush. On further, he says, we do not possess your military might nor your nuclear weapons. Of course, this president may be presiding over the United States unless Israel protects itself. This president may be the one that sees for the first time a radical Islamist terrorist regime get a nuclear weapon, and that will change the world forever. We can't afford for that to happen. But he points out, at the time he wrote this, we do not possess your nuclear weapons. Nevertheless, we fight you with the Almighty God. So if our act of jihad and our fighting with you cause fear and terror, then many thanks be to God. Because it is Him that has thrown fear into your hearts, which resulted in your infidelity, paganism, and your statement that God had a Son and your Trinity beliefs. And then the provision he follows that up with from the Quran, soon shall we cast terror into the hearts of unbelievers, for that they join companies with Allah for which He has sent no authority. Their place will be in the fire, and evil is the home of the wrongdoers. And he misspelled there. When he said their place, he used T-H-E-R-E. But I mean, this is amazing stuff. He's admitting, we want to destroy you. And if you think for a moment that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or Ahmadinejad or Khomeini would not mind using a nuke to destroy what some of them believe were people descended from apes and pigs, as some in the Muslim Brotherhood say, well, you got nothing coming. These people are not stupid, but they're insanely crazy in their desire to kill innocent people. He went on at the end of his pleading on page 6, says, you will be greatly defeated in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that America will fall politically, militarily, and economically. Your end is very near, and your fall will be just as the fall of the towers on the blessed 9/11 day. We will raise from the ruins, God willing. We will leave this imprisonment with our noses raised high in dignity. As the lion emerges from his den, we shall pass over the blades of the sword into the gates of heaven. So we ask from God to accept our contributions to the great attack on America, and to place our 19 martyred brethren among the highest peaks in paradise. This is a guy that some people want to bring to the United States. They have no idea how desperately wrong that would be. He's being held constitutionally right where he is, and under no circumstances should he be allowed to be brought into the United States itself. They have the perfect courtroom set up down in Guantanamo for conducting terrorist trials. Enough bulletproof material in the middle of an area where a bombing would not do the damage that it would in Manhattan. Israel understands the threat. They understand the danger. And it absolutely breaks my heart to find out that Israel is having to seek another ally that understands the threat of radical Islam to them and to the United States. Now, it was Prime Minister Netanyahu that asked me, after I apologized for putting them in a position, for America putting them in a position to have to defend not only themselves but the United States, because some people here do not understand the threat. He said, I just ask that you remind your president, people in America, that it was your president who said the words, Israel must defend itself by itself. I didn't remember President Obama saying that. I had to go back and do a word search, and it turns out that was slipped in a bunch of other glowing comments about what a wonderful ally, and we're not going to let Iran get nukes and all this stuff. And then he slides that little sentence in there that is profound. But Israel must defend itself by itself. That's why I wasn't the only one that didn't pick up on that, because of the way in which he contextualized it. But here's an article from the Blaze today from Sharona Schwartz. How bad are things between Israel and the United States? Israeli foreign minister says it's time to find new allies. Israel's foreign policy for many years went in one direction toward Washington, but my policy has more directions. This is Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman who said this. He said, there are enough countries that we can be a help to, and therefore our foreign policy must be to search for allies. The Americans have a lot of problems and challenges around the world that they need to solve. They have problems at home. We need to understand them and our place in the global arena. We need to stop demanding, complaining, moaning, and instead seek countries that are not dependent on money from the Arab or Islamic world and who want to cooperate with us in the field of innovation. I mean, Israel's been a leading innovator in intellectual technology. They need to be our friends. They believe in the value of life as we do. They do not name streets and holidays for people who kill innocent women, children, innocent victims, men who never saw it coming. Whereas even in Palestine in East Texas, Palestine, as it's called now, well, never called that before, recent history, but it's time that we realize what a friend we have in Israel and that we could never spend enough money to create the defense system we have in Israel if we will just be supportive. One other thing I want to address before conclude today, there are some people that are saying, calling attention to the President's omitting the words "under God" from the Gettysburg Address when he did the entire Gettysburg Address on camera. And I don't know whose decision it was to leave that out. I don't know if he was just reading it, whoever gave it to him to read, and the teleprompter took it out and he didn't realize. I don't know what happened. But, Mr. Speaker, it's important that people understand, yes, there are 5 existing copies of the Gettysburg Address. There's only one that Abraham Lincoln signed, the Bliss copy, that unless the President's removed it like he did Winston Churchill's bust from the White House, unless it's been removed, it's up there in the Lincoln bedroom. This is the Bliss copy, it's called. And actually, at the Gettysburg Foundation website, they have an explanation of those 5 copies, the Nicolay copy, the Hay copy. So you had a couple of them there, and you can see what actually was in the copy. But the Everett copy, Senator Everett was the speaker that went 2 hours or so, and he asked for a copy, so Abraham Lincoln made sure he got a copy. And I was talking to brilliant historian Stephen Mansfield this week. He was pointing out these things, that it was thought that Lincoln had provided his secretary with his notes, and since he had interlineated, as I see people on both sides of the aisle do all the time here, making notes, scratching stuff, putting stuff in, he had interlineated under God, so that when he gave the speech, under God was part of it. I don't know about anybody on this floor that wants the congressional record to carry a copy of their speech before they made all the changes in it, just as Lincoln did. But the last 3 copies, the Everett copy that Lincoln personally got to Senator Everett, it says that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. And then the Bancroft copy, that was one that also was requested by historian George Bancroft, and that has that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. And then the last copy, the Bliss copy that's most often used, is considered to be the most authoritative copy of what was said at Gettysburg, because this is the only copy that Abraham Lincoln signed. He didn't sign any of the others. He signed this one, and it went to Colonel Bliss, who was going to use it to auction and use the money to help wounded warriors. This is a nation under God, it had a new birth of freedom, and I hope and pray God will give us wisdom to avoid destroying that freedom. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3, 2013, the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Larson, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Minority Leader.
I thank the